There's a couple of things I have to say first. That primarily, I will make it one. I cannot tell you who that man was, and neither can anyone else. Science is never going to be able to say that we can prove the name of the man that was once upon a time wrapped in the Shroud of Turin. At least the vast majority of us don't believe that it can be done. Simply because science, by the very nature of the thing, is forced to deal only with facts. You can't make wild guesses. And no matter how long you talk, my record is 6.5 to 7 consecutive hours of nonstop talking, and I don't think I repeated myself once in that length of time. You can't talk that long about the cloth, the information coded into it, the man that really was once upon a time wrapped in it. But if you're going to be honest, and that is the name of the game, sooner or later you have to say that nowhere in the cloth is there a name. Nowhere does it say this is a portrait of. We can't tell you who he was. Neither, of course, can we hope to tell you that that was Jesus of Nazareth, simply because we do not know what Jesus looked like. Painting and sculpture were forbidden to the Jews. It was against their religion. We don't have his fingerprints, we don't have his blood type, we don't have his dental structure, and we really don't even have a good description of him. For some reason that nobody really understands, none of Jesus' 4 biographers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, bothered to tell us what he looked like. All we know about Jesus from the Bible is that he was young, between 30 and 35, and he must have been built like a bull. Jesus was a carpenter in the days before there were lumber yards. If he wanted a board, he had to cut the tree down. If they had a little money in those days, they'd have a donkey to drag it into town. We can show even historically that Jesus was among the extreme poor. The best that he could ever have hoped to have done would be to whip that tree down to a size he could handle, put it across his shoulders, and carry it. He had to have been built like the lumberjack that he really was. But again, that's all we know about him. So there's no way that I can tell you that that was Jesus of Nazareth. But you should also know that the vast majority of court cases are not won on direct evidence. It's very seldom that anyone might come forward and say, Bob committed the murder. I watched him do it. That's why we have police departments, detectives, put a case together and pile up circumstantial evidence piece by piece by piece until the weight of that evidence is so great that it's impossible not to render a verdict. And that's what we're doing. If nothing more, the Shroud of Turin research project has become the biggest piece of scientific detective work that the world has ever seen. And tonight, here, you're the judge and you're the jury. And I'm not being cute. The only promise I'll make you tonight is that I'll tell you the truth. For a limited amount of time, I'll give you facts and data, a little bit of what we've accumulated. And you do anything you want to do with it. I couldn't care less. They tell me that that's a horrible way to start a talk, but I've started a great many that way, simply because it's truth. I know what I believe today, but there's no way that I can really convince anyone else. All I can do is give you some of the information we've got, and then you decide if you think you can. Who was he? What, if anything, does he mean to you? The Shroud of Turin is a piece of linen cloth, 14 feet long, 3 feet 7 inches wide, and obviously carries on its surface the image of a crucified man. Without question, it's the most controversial thing that the Roman Catholic Church ever got their hands on. They never actually owned it until last October. The cloth was privately owned by the House of Savoy since the 1400s. The ranking member in Savoy was Umberto, King of Italy, deposed, living in exile in Lisbon, Portugal. When he flew out of Torino one step ahead of death in the late 40s, he left the cloth behind in his private chapel. That chapel today is the Cathedral of Turin. It came under the protectorship of the Archbishop, and that's where the name came from. Turin was the ancestral home of the Savoys for centuries. Umberto died about 1.5 years ago. Instead of giving the cloth to his daughter, as was more or less expected, he willed it to the church. They finally got legal possession of it in October. But they never did actually make up their mind if this is indeed the cloth that Jesus was wrapped in for burial or not. They fought wars over it. It wasn't until 1968 that Pope Paul authorized the formation of a team of scientists, international in scope, to examine it and try to determine once and for all, genuine or bogus. Many of us think that it's more than a little weird that no one ever called this team together. To the best of my knowledge, not one man or woman on it today was ever appointed to it. And yet today, for without question the first time in history, every discipline of science is involved to the utmost of expertise and technology, equipment and brains, in a non-military project. You couldn't stop this if you wanted to. Someone at the Air Force Academy has said that we used to think that the strangest thing in the universe were the black holes of space. Today, we know it's a 14-foot-long cloth over the altar in Turin. But that's your decision. cloth turned up in 1352 in a small village in central France called Lorri, not terribly far from Paris. And obviously, the first question to be answered when the team did come into existence was if this is really the burial shroud of Jesus. What was it doing in France? Where was it for 13 centuries? The tracing was volunteered by a couple of men in England, Dr. John A.T. Robinson, Bishop of Woolwich, Anglican Church, Dean of Trinity College, Cambridge, and a historian from Oxford named Ian Wilson. They volunteered to try to trace it using art and literature. It was Ian who discovered that every one of the masters, you name him, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Da Vinci, whoever, used that face for his model of Christ. That's why you think you recognize him. You've seen that face 1,000 times. One man has made Jesus an Italian, someone else a Frenchman, a Dutchman, a Greek, a woman. They've romanticized him, but they've done everything imaginable to him. But they've all copied details that couldn't have been taken from anything in the world but the cloth. The conformity, the likeness, is true all the way back to the year 500. Prior to 500, there isn't any. Once again, somebody gave Jesus the face of a 12-year-old kid. Someone else gave him a beard the color of mine. I've already said your guess is just as good as mine is what Jesus looked like. And yet, for some reason, it appears that the entire church, east and west, had somehow, before the year 500, reached the conclusion that this was the true likeness of Christ. Ian found a letter written by a Greek bishop, a man who lived and wrote around the year 300, 325, Eusebius of Caesarea, a prolific writer. He did a great deal. But no church, no denomination has ever considered his work inspired. That is to say that no one has ever thought that it should be in the Bible. But he does give us a tremendous picture of what life was like in the early church. Customs, traditions, stories, legends, that sort of thing. That's where the poor guy got into trouble every time. Like me, he was a storyteller. Like me, they called him a bull artist. They said you couldn't believe a word he said. It was sci-fi. It was too far out. Who could ever believe Eusebius? For instance, he gives us the story of Abgar, who was king of Edessa, Turkey at the time of Christ. Abgar was dying of an incurable disease. He had heard of Jesus as a healer. So he sent a messenger, a soldier, from Edessa, at that time it was part of Syria, south into Palestine to ask Jesus to come north and heal him. We know that Jesus never left the nation. Supposedly, he told the soldier, "Go back and tell your king that I can't come, but I will send a disciple." Shortly after the ascension, the Apostle Thomas is supposed to have dispatched a mysterious disciple named Addai north into Turkey, carrying under his arm a cloth with an image on it. Abgar believed on Jesus. It did not say he believed in the cloth. I know I don't have to say it here, but it's always good practice. I know of absolutely no reason why this cloth should be worshipped. I know that there are people who do. I think that they're extremely wrong. I know of no miracles attributed to it. I know of nothing that's ever happened to anyone by handling it. You will not have a cancer healed by holding a photograph of a cloth over the body. I read that in one of the folk newspapers not long ago. They were selling photographs. Some people will do anything to make a buck. But I can talk about lives turned 180 degrees around. That might be the greatest miracle of them all. But to say that the shroud is that kind of divine, at least personally, I can't buy it. Abgar believed on Jesus. He was healed of his disease. He led the city to the Lord. Edessa became the first Christian city in the world. Oh, it's still there. Today it's known as Urfa, in south-central Turkey. The Eastern Orthodox Church calls it a holy city. They claim that they date their Christianity back to the time of Christ. There have always been monks and hermits living in caves and tombs around the place just to be close to it. After Abgar died, his son Marno went back to the pagan gods. He proceeded to slaughter every Christian he could find. The cloth vanished. Apparently, it was gone for about 200 years. Then somewhere around the year 300, there was a disastrous flood in south-central Turkey. Part of the city wall washed out. A rock fell out high above the west gate. There, in a leather pouch or a bag, was the cloth. Apparently, someone had bricked it into the city wall for safekeeping. It was worshipped. It was the prized relic of the entire church, to the extent that the emperor decided that it belonged to Byzantium. He sent an army to get it. It was simple. They were bigger. He welcomed the cloth to Constantinople. It hung there on the wall of a cathedral in what seems to have been a trellis-like frame until the year 1204. Now, there's no way that we're going to prove this, but it does look awfully interesting. Using X-ray fluorescence, we've been able to locate every crease that anyone has ever placed in the cloth since the day it was woven, and refolded accordingly. If you follow one set of very deep-set creases, meaning that the cloth had been folded that way for a long time. 900 years? We get something like this. His head and chest, remarkably reminiscent of a mysterious relic that disappeared centuries ago, something called the Mandelion, the face of Christ, which is supposed to have hung on the wall of a cathedral in Constantinople. We're not about to prove it, but it does look awfully good that the Shroud of Turin and the Mandelion were one and the same thing. 1204 was the year of the Fourth Crusade. That was the year that the Crusaders breached the walls of Constantinople and sacked the city, stripping it. Ian found a letter written by a French Crusader writing home, "I have seen the Sidwan, the burial cloth of our Lord. Not much of a peg." Another letter, "The Sidwan has disappeared, and neither Frenchman nor Greek knows its whereabouts." And that's all. But they put together a case that'll hold water in virtually any court of law in the world. One of the armies sacking Constantinople was a Knights Templar, dealers in religious relics, unbelievably secretive. They'd never give you the time of day if they had any choice in the matter. Immensely wealthy. Without question, the wealthiest people in the world. They had built castles all over Europe and the Middle East just to house their money. Ultimately, that's what destroyed them. They were also perfectly capable of stealing anything they wanted if they wanted it badly enough. And it's perfectly easy to imagine a crusader finding the cloth hanging on the wall, literally ripping it off, shoved under a leather jerkin, on his way to France. Circumstantial. But around the year 1300, the Templars were in awfully big trouble. That money of theirs was driving the King of France out of his mind. They had more than him. Somewhere there's an unwritten law that no one should have more money than the king. All he needed was half an excuse to get it. He got that excuse when the rumor went around France that the Templars were idolaters. They were worshipping a face, the face of a bearded man on a cloth. I'm not certain that the king ever made any attempt to find it. He didn't want it, he didn't need it, he couldn't have cared less. He had what he wanted. He got their money, not without a good scrap, but he got it. He pulled a pre-dawn raid that would have made Hitler proud of him, rounded up every Grand Master of the Templars and burned them all alive at the stake for idolatry. Every man died, protesting his innocence at least to idolatry, but he died. The last one to go up in the flames was a man named Geoffrey de Charnay, the first Earl of Chambray. Within a very few years after he died in the flames, the second Earl, also Geoffrey, placed the Shroud of Turin on public display. Since then, Roman Catholic record-keeping is phenomenal. They can almost tell you the name of every individual who's even looked at this cloth for almost 700 years, proving beyond the point of argument. Whatever this thing is, however that image came to be impressed on it, it happened before 1352. Not too long ago, while renovating a castle in England, a place in Somerset called Templecombe, the home of the Knights Templar in England, found a board with his face on it, dating back to Templar days. They had it. However they may have gotten it, the Knights Templar had it. At the same time that John and Ian had been doing their thing in England, and they weren't alone, in Zurich until he died about a year ago was a botanist by the name of Max Fry. There's a few of us here tonight that are old enough to remember the name. It was on the front page of every newspaper in the world a while back. Max headed up the commission of criminologists that investigated Dag Hammarskjöld's death. That's what he was, a criminologist, working for the police departments all over Europe. Special consultant to the UN. The kind of a man that would take a dust sampling off your clothes, tell you where you went, what you did, and the other person's first name. He was positively dangerous. He'd seen a highly enhanced photograph of the cloth. He saw what he thought was pollen caught in the weave. That was Max's field. Pollen, of course, is just as identifiable as your fingerprint. There are no two types of plants producing a pollen that's even slightly similar. If you find pollen, you know what kind of a plant it came from. If you know where that plant grows, you know where the object has been. It's that easy. We've got pollen caught in the weave of every item of clothing that we've got on tonight that's been exposed to the open air. It's microscopic, but you're not going to get it out by washing it or dry cleaning it. If you're smart, you keep it away from people like Max. They're apt to tell you too much about yourself. It's almost a literal miracle that in 72, he asked for and he got permission to take a dust sampling off the cloth. He identified some 28 types of pollen in that first sample. It was no tremendous surprise to anyone that the first one he definitely pinpointed was a type of beech, growing exclusively in northern and central Europe. Big deal. The cloth turned up in France. He found pollen from plants that grow nowhere in the world but Italy. It's been in Turin since the 1400s. He found 8 types of pollen from plants that grow nowhere in the world but southern and central Turkey, in the area around Constantinople, proving that France is not where the cloth originated. And maybe, Just maybe. Eusebius wasn't the bull artist they've been calling him for so many centuries. It might very well be that he knew exactly what he was writing about back in the year 300. Then Max turned up 9 types of pollen that couldn't be identified in any textbook in botany. He was supposed to have owned them all. He said it's not unusual that there are a large number of unimportant, unclassified plants. He called it an educated guess. I can't copy the German accent. You got the way maybe the cloth was. A quick flight to Israel, a walking tour of Judea with his glass, and Max found what he wanted. I'm quoting him. Desert plants that grow nowhere in the world but southern Israel, in the area around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. In my professional opinion, at some time in its history, this cloth has been exposed to the open air in Italy, France, southern or central Turkey, and southern Israel, in the area around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. Since then, several more samplings and a lot more pollen. They fill in the gaps, they tie the whole thing together a lot tighter. But then, sitting with his microscope in his living room in Zurich, he did what never crossed anyone's mind. It was strictly a bonus, a gift. Max had taken the cloth backward in time 1,000 years. He had found fossilized pollen from plants that had been known to be extinct since the early centuries. Again, proving rather conclusively that the cloth has got to be at least a full 1,000 years older than its own recorded history. While these men and women, there have been many, have been doing their thing all over Europe and the Middle East, in this country the work is scientific. I suppose that's because that's the way the Yankees think. That's where our money is. That's where the people are that got drafted for this job. And we've been drafted. There's no 2 people in this world, on this team that ever get together anywhere in the world anymore without the question coming up almost immediately. Why now? Why us? Nobody wanted anything to do with it. In 1978, the mildest thing I called the Shroud of Turin was garbage. When Dr. Gimihala called and asked me if I wanted to get involved with him in the work that was about to start, I asked Tom if his brain melted. He's a nuclear physicist. He didn't think it was funny. I said, "You're crazy. You've gone stark raving mad. It couldn't possibly be real. Even if it is real, what's it good for?" Well, if you don't understand it, that's spelled S-T-U-P-I-D. I'd made a preconceived opinion. I'd made up my mind before I knew a thing about it. Just about the stupidest thing you can do. But I did it. I can't talk about anyone else. I very quickly found out that virtually everyone else agreed with me. With the exception of only a very few people, all anyone wanted to know was who did it, how. The how part is still extremely intriguing. Ray Rogers may be the best name on the team professionally. He's a chemist at Los Alamos. He gave a statement to the New York Times a while back, and it was truth, that everyone went to Italy expecting to set up their equipment, work for 15 minutes, pack up the equipment, and come back home. Today, the burden of proof is on the skeptic. That, too, is truth. All we wanted to know was who did it. The labs? You all know them. Los Alamos Scientific, the world's biggest. They made the nuke bomb. Pasadena Jet Propulsion, JPL. They're giving us the pictures coming back from Saturn, Jupiter, the spacecraft. The Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs. The Air Force Weapons Lab at Albuquerque. Brooks Institute of Photography, Macone Associates, Brookhaven National, half the universities. There's a paradox involved. It means absolutely nothing, but I think you have to admit it's different. Virtually every man and woman involved in this project is involved one way or the other in the development, the assembly, or the distribution of the bomb, working on the Shroud of the Prince of Peace. This doesn't mean a thing, but it is a little weird. But those labs are only where the people are working tonight. I'm talking, they're working. I've said it on many a campus and overseas. I'm not the least little bit ashamed to be an American. Where else in the world could something like this happen? That we have the use of the most sophisticated equipment the world has, unless Russia's got something better, and we doubt it, on a non-priority basis. That only means that if the military isn't using a certain piece of equipment tonight, you can almost guarantee that someone on this team has it. Just do it on your own time, pay your own way, and for God's sakes, don't use military stationery. Where else but the States? I can't begin to tell you what they found. There simply aren't enough hours tonight. I can only give you a very quick overlook, something that might interest you a bit. As early as 1898, an Italian attorney by the name of Secondo Pia took the first photograph of the cloth. He wrote that he almost fell out of his window when he developed his plate, because what should have been a negative turned out to be what we have here, a positive, proving that he had photographed a negative. Every time you take a photograph, your new negative is the reverse of what you were looking at. Black becomes white, white is black. If he had a positive, he must have photographed a negative. Over the centuries, the image on the cloth had been described as vague, weak, indistinct, ephemeral, weird, made with unworldly colors. I'll buy the weird. It's only because light and shade are reversed. Black is white, white is black. More than 500 years before photography. The first photographic negative was not printed until 1857. This turned up in 1352. More than 500 years before photography, something had imprinted a photographic negative on a piece of linen cloth. When this team went to Italy in October of 78, over 50,000 photographs were taken. If you took a deep breath, somebody took a picture of it to record it. The pictures are a lot better than his, but all that anyone has managed to prove is that Secunda Pia was right. The image is still a photographic negative. Mid-70s, Air Force Weapons Lab, Albuquerque. A couple of teachers from the academy, John Jackson, Eric Jumper, Captain, Major, both had their doctorates, spatial physics, spatial engineering, Mariner Space Program, using some semi-secure equipment, a VP-8 image analyzer. The thing had been developed to map the surface of Mars and for military surveillance. One night, John took a slide of his face, put it under the camera, projected it through the equipment, closed-circuit television, and both men have said many times they know exactly the way Secunda Pia felt when he developed his plate, because they almost literally fell out of their chairs when the image came out three-dimensional. And we don't know how to do that to anything. Science simply has not progressed that far. We know how to decode it, but we have yet to learn how to put it into anything, let alone a piece of linen cloth. They took their equipment and their technique down to JPL. They scanned that frontal image the same way a TV picture is produced. Scan a line, jump, scan a line, jump. The computer began to produce strips, bearing the configuration, the outline, the shape of the man in the cloth. John and Eric's wives and some other girls sat down with cardboard boxes and razor blades, traced the outlines out and cut them out. The girls have put together what, without any question, is the world's craziest jigsaw puzzle. 560-some pieces of cardboard. Assembled vertically, the computer had produced a three-dimensional image. You can call it a statue, of a man 5 feet 8 inches tall, mutilated almost beyond belief. There's no other photograph on Earth that you can do this with. At the very least, what we have here is the world's oldest and the world's strangest photograph. That's why the work must go on. In the long run, there are no bottom answers. There's no bottom line. Man in the shroud has no eyes. I'm sure you'd say, as I did, that they were closed in death. Some people think he's staring at them. But it was a mind-bender in 78 when JPL enhanced his face to the degree that we could see that where the eyes should be are a pair of circular blank spots, button-like objects, until one of the archaeologists came up with the information that it was the custom of first-century Jews to put a pebble on the eyes of a dead man, to weight the lid shut until rigor mortis set in, to keep them from popping open. If they were wealthy, they might use a coin. These were approximately the size of a first-century coin. Joseph of Arimathea was wealthy. We know that he had money on his person. He had just purchased a piece of cloth with which to bury Jesus. Would he be willing to provide a couple of coins? Your guess is as good as mine is. The team took an extremely sensitive camera to Italy. Same thing the astronauts have been carrying around the moon. Two of the bigger labs in this country each gave us $1 million worth of specially made film for the work. We'd become professional beggars, too. But it worked. Photographed the eyes. I double-talked this one for over 2 years, trying to say it but not say it. I was itching. But now that Father Philus of Loyola has published his paper, it amounts to a small book, copyrighted. At least I can quote him. He's dead now, too. He died about 2 months ago. There's an awfully high death rate in this project. You might think someone didn't like us. But, as I said, it's controversial. There are men who are going to tell you that there's nothing there, simply because you can't explain it. Why can you see those coins in the first place? No answer. Stranger yet, how in the world can you possibly read the markings? No answer. Why do they appear in some types of photography? In other types, there's nothing there. If there really is something there, you should be able to see it no matter what kind of film you use. But that's not the case. Yet there is something there. I couldn't possibly make it up. I've never seen a Judean lepton in my life. I wouldn't know what to conjure up. You can't call it self-hypnosis. Yet you can read 7 out of 10 letters in sequence in the middle of the 2 words Tiberius Caesar. That's what it is, a Judean lepton, minted by a character named Pontius Pilate. The Bible refers to it as the widow's mite, the smallest coin ever minted in Israel. We found 3 of them in a museum down in East Point, Georgia. They look as if they've been cut out of a piece of bronze with a pair of tin snips. But the important thing is that depending on which numismatist, which coin expert you happen to be talking to, this particular lepton was in circulation for a maximum of either 3 years or 7. Take your choice. One man says 3, the other 7. But that only means that if whoever placed those coins in his eyes was using a coin that he could spend in the store, a coin that was currently circulable, the man in the shroud died within an outside maximum of 7 years of the 12th year of Tiberius Caesar. That's our AD 29. He apparently died between the year 29 and 36. Maybe between the year 29 and 32. How much closer would you like to try to get it? Let me tell you about the man. And once again, in the interest of honesty, there is no name on the cloth. But you've all seen Quincy on television. If you haven't, your kids have. The forensic pathologist, the medical detective, the man who's going to take a corpse and tell you all there is to know about it. This work was done at Los Angeles Forensic by Dr. Bob Buckley. They have the rather dubious distinction of being the world's busiest. They know dead men. They get more corpses per hour than any other lab in the world. Philadelphia Forensic, Dr. John Gambisi. They did the work on this. The man in the shroud was a Jewish person. He was between 30 and 35 years old. He stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighed approximately 155 pounds. He took one of the worst beatings the doctors have ever known a man to take and walk away from it. This is his dorsal image. It's his back. You have his head, shoulders, buttocks, legs. His feet are at the bottom. All the white on the image itself is blood. The frontal image likewise. The white is blood. It is not a photograph of blood. It is blood. Proven in the laboratory 12 different ways. 2 of them are acceptable in any court of law in any nation in the world today to prove the presence of blood in an object. The man in the shroud took in excess of 120 strokes of a 3-thonged Roman flagrum. A flagrum? We found several in Italian museums. A short leather whip. Lash is about 24 inches. 3 of them, 2 balls of lead on the end of each lash. They were either sharpened or they had spikes in them. Meat was ripped out of his body with every flick of the lash. He was scourged nude, bent over double and tied to either a ring in the floor or a short post, so his back was like a tabletop. They could do what they wanted to do to him. He was scourged by 2 men standing on opposite sides. The man on the right was a little bit taller than the man on the left. He was a great deal more sadistic. He enjoyed his work. He overlapped the strokes, extremely methodical. He curved them around to get the front of the body. There isn't an inch of his body, front or back, and we can see every inch with X-ray fluorescence that does not bear scourge marks. They picked the most sensitive areas to cut him to shreds. The only place they missed is the pericardium, the area just above the heart. The doctors say if he had taken that kind of a beating over the heart, he would have died under the lash, which means that this must have been done by experts. They were pros. It was not the first time that they had ever brought a man to a second or 2 before death and then stopped. They knew how to make it hurt the most and last the longest. When one more stroke of the lash would undoubtedly have killed him, the beating ceased. The man in the shroud wore a cap of thorns. Not a circlet the way we've always envisaged Jesus wearing, for it appears to have been a complete cap. His entire head covered with puncture wounds, made by a small, extremely sharp and pointed object, such as a thorn. For me, it makes a great deal more sense. I find it very difficult to imagine anyone that will give a man a beating like that one, taking time out like a small child to make a daisy chain. For me, at least, it's a lot easier to imagine someone getting a sadistic idea. He says he's a king. He needs a crown. Grabbing his sword, running out and back of the Fortress Antonia, cutting off a thorn bush. Eastern thorns are that long. Maybe grabbing a handful from the fire, quickly twisting them into a knot or a ball, possibly tying a rope around it, jamming it down to his eyebrow. Something like that was done to him. Even possible that one thorn went to an eyeball. Over Monsignor Ricci's desk in Rome is an ancient painting of the head of Christ. I have no idea who did it. I've never seen it anywhere in the world but there. I failed to ask. I should have. It shows Jesus wearing for a crown a clump of thorns with a rope tied around it. I can only say that something like that was done to him. The man in the shroud carried a heavy object tied on his shoulders after the beating, something weighing between 70 and 100 pounds. He has no flesh left on his shoulder blade. The wounds have been rubbed together, the flesh is chafed off. Undoubtedly, this would be the cross piece of the cross. Contrary to paintings and sculpture such as the Way of the Cross, there really is no record that the Romans ever made anyone drag the entire thing. At least normally, if there is such a word, they would tie the cross piece on in the position of crucifixion. Then they would march the victim through the streets, side of the execution, always taking the longest possible route, wandering up one street and down the next one. The entire idea was to deter future crime, to keep you from doing whatever it was he did. They wanted the greatest number of people possible to see him dying. The records say they'd have a leash around his ankles like a dog to keep him from running away. They also say that it was considered fun to pull their legs out from under them, with their arms tied in this position. The man in the shroud has the end of his nose gone, dirt ground into it from a bad fall. He has no skin left on his left knee, with dirt in it. He took at least 2 major falls. Someone worked him over rather badly. He was belted in the face more than once. He's got a shiner that's a beaut. He appears to have a broken nose. There's a separation in the cartilage. But he has no broken bones. Nose is cartilage. Although every joint, including his fingers, appear to be out of joint, probably from writhing and twisting on the cross. Someone grabbed his beard and ripped it out. His beard was plucked. They had a lot of sport with it. This is not a photograph. This was done with a computer. Neither is it color accurate. It's not intended to be. The idea was to determine how much blood was visible on his face. Using the computer, they subtracted everything in the face except blood. Regardless of the shade, there is nothing visible in this picture except blood. They didn't leave much of him, did they? To me, if nobody else, that's Isaiah 53. He was mutilated beyond that of any other man. At the very least, that's what you'd have seen if you'd seen him hanging on the cross. They certainly didn't leave much of him. The man in the shroud was crucified. Once again, not the way we've always imagined Jesus being crucified, through the palm, but through the wrist. Probably the simplest thing I've ever known of anyone to do in shroud-related work. Someone obtained a cadaver, the body of a man. They took his arm off at the shoulder, nailed it to the wall with a 10-penny nail through the palm, and then sat and watched it. Within something less than 2 hours, the bones in the palm separated, the nail ripped through, the arm fell. Simple conclusion, a nail through the palm will not support the dead weight of a man's arm, let alone a body in the throes of death agony. But we have a small space in our wrist, just below the heel of the hand. Ironically, the size of a square-cut nail. A couple of these little toys driven in there will hold any amount of weight. If you've never seen one before, it's a crucifixion nail. There's a lot of them around. The Romans apparently enjoyed their work. They left us a great many souvenirs. Cute, aren't they? A pair of them driven through the wrist will hold anything. It does not conflict with Scripture. I realize that depending on which translation of the Bible you own, the Gospel of John uses the word hand or palm for the point to which a nail was driven into Christ's body. But the Greeks have got at least 3 words for everything. There was a native-born Greek pastor that said that, too. He laughed at it. Boy, you Yankees are all alike. You're just never going to get it through your thick, stupid Yankee heads that we Greeks have got 3 words for everything. He's right. There's the word palmera. The Greek, forgive me. I know what my pronunciation is. I've had Greeks scream in agony when they heard me try. But it's the best I can do. The word palmera covers this part of the body. It was not used in the New Testament. The word that was used is chaya, C-H-I-E-R. It covers this part of the body. You can translate it finger, palm, wrist, forearm, elbow. Take your choice. About 400 years before Christ, at the command of Caesar, 70 rabbis were ordered from Jerusalem down to Alexandria to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek. You can still buy that book. It's called the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scripture. The word chaya, same word, used many times. Somewhere in Chronicles, one of the kings wore a ring on his. It refers to the joints of the chaya. And in Genesis 24, Eliezer, Abraham's servant, was ordered north into Syria to purchase a wife for Isaac. He gave Rebekah gold bangles, put them on her chaya. Where do you girls wear your bracelets? It's identically the same word. Our only problem was that until 1979, we did not know how to crucify anyone. Everything that we've ever taught or been taught on the subject has been based on somebody's imagination. You see, the Emperor Constantine outlawed crucifixion in the year 315. There hasn't been a recorded one since. We've forgotten how to do it. Maybe we should forget it again? And then again, maybe it's doggone near time the church found out what a crucifixion was. You know, we can throw that word around awfully loosely once or twice a year. We get maudlin about it. We sing about it. You know, the old rugged cross? And nobody had the faintest idea of how to do it. We had to learn. Dr. Buckland had himself crucified. Not one of those freaky things you read about occasionally. He was tied on a cross. It was done under supervision. He was jacked up so they could find out firsthand as a medical doctor what would happen to his own organs. He couldn't think of any other way to do it. Dr. Gambisi used skeletons. Today, we could crucify someone and make it work. The only place it would work is the wrist. It does not conflict with the original language. I presume you know, but it's worth saying it again. The New Testament was originally written in Greek. There has always been an international language. Today, it's our brand of English. If you speak Americanese, you can go anywhere in the world today and have no problems. It's a mandatory subject in most European countries from the 4th grade on. All the airlines operate in American once they're in the air. The international language. In the 1st century, that international language was Greek. If you had any kind of an education, you spoke Greek. Apparently, the writers of the New Testament intended that their work be read in every nation in the known world. They wrote it in the international language. Our problem is to translate it. This does not conflict with the Greek. They used 2 nails in his feet. They put one foot flat against the upright the way we've always imagined it. They drove a nail in diagonally just below his ankle. It came out through his heel. They put the other foot on top of it. They nailed the 2 of them together, lower down through the instep. He ended up by taking 2 nails through one foot, one through the other. Once again, that's the only way it could have been done and make it work. Dr. Gambisi approved it with skeletons. If they'd used a single nail, the way the painters like to show it, the victim would have thrown his weight against it only once to push himself up and breathe. He would never do it the second time. Like the palm, the bones would have separated. It would have been over much too quickly to make the Romans happy. And this was intended to be the ultimate death. It wasn't. It came mighty close to it. The man in the shroud has an elliptical wound of about 4 centimeters between the 5th and 6th rib on the right. Is it a coincidence that 4 centimeters is the size of a Roman lance head? Whatever made it, lance, spear, javelin, penetrated diagonally upward and went to his heart. A huge amount of blood that could only have come from the heart, as well as a thin watery substance, more water than blood, flowed out of the wound, has separated and flowed across his back. It's been sitting there for 2,000 years waiting for someone to take it to a lab. The doctors say that it proves a couple things. The man in the shroud did not die the usual crucifixion death of suffocation. Neither, of course, did he die of cruel fracture, smashing the bones of his thighs with a club so he couldn't push himself up to breathe. He died of cardiac arrest. His heart just stopped, for whatever reason. He was dead before the weapon went in. What does it sound like? We had to do what I honestly don't believe anyone has ever done before. We had to look at the Bible in a totally unique manner. Tom Demhowler woke up one night in a cold sweat in Italy, rolled off his cot, grabbed a clipboard, and started to run. The one thing nobody had thought to choreograph before the team left the States. His thought? What if everybody but him turned out to be a Roman Catholic? Seriously. Can you see the headlines? Bias, prejudice. They made up their minds before they left the States. The team turned out to have been 20% Roman Catholic, every mainline Protestant denomination, some non-mainline, Mormons, and Orthodox Jews. But many said that this is only the way they were brought up as kids. In actuality, they were agnostic. Maybe God's real, maybe he's not. Who knows? Who cares? We don't need him anyway. An agnostic. But we had to look at the Bible not as atheists or agnostics or cynics or skeptics, not even as believers. The 2 or 3 of us that might have had the guts in 78 to say that we were believers in public had to be the devil's advocate. We had to look at the Bible strictly as research people. That's what I mean unique. This may truly be the first time in 2,000 years that anyone has ever gotten into that book without trying to prove something. We were not trying to prove it right. Neither were we trying to prove it wrong. All we wanted were the answers to a couple of questions that in 78 and today seem to be awfully good ones. Does that book say anything about a cloth with an image on it, or the mechanism that might have produced the image? Because I think you would believe that if this thing was actually around in the 1st century, somebody should have recorded it. And yet on the surface, that's not the case. We had to take the entire crucifixion and resurrection story apart, a word at a time, in the original languages, reading everything we could get our hands on. Philo, Eusebius, Irenaeus, Polycarp, Flavius Virgilius Renortus, Aristotle, the entire Jewish Talmud, all 18,000 pages of it. It jumps from one subject to the other on every single page, and there's no index. Guess who got that job? But we had to have facts. Truth is the name of the game. Tradition is for the birds. There's always somebody in every audience that argues with me on the subject, but tradition cannot be trusted. I'm tempted to say that at least 9 times out of 10 it's been proven wrong. You have to have facts, data. That's all that counts, truth. We had to start at the very beginning with a mysterious character who comes out of the woodwork a few hours after Jesus died. Mysterious in the sense that he's totally unheard of before, but awfully important to us, because all 4 biographers of Jesus tell us, and if you didn't know it, you ought to, that if any 3 or 4 of us were to walk out here on Market Street tonight and watch an automobile accident, if all 3 of us do an article on it, if our stories agree, then by the laws of external evidence, what we've written is history. 3 or 4 people witness a current event, they record it, they agree, it's historical fact. All 4 writers tell us that Joseph of Arimathea showed up in Jerusalem a few hours after Jesus died, carrying under his arm what you girls would call a length of piece goods, a piece of cloth that could be used to make a coat, a robe, a jacket, or bury somebody in it. It's usually translated shroud. That's not a bad translation. We still know very little about Joe. Arimathea is nothing but a bump on top of a hill a few miles north of Jerusalem. He was wealthy. He was a rabbi. He was in politics because he was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court. He had the title of Counselor of Israel. That's where we stopped. In ancient Israel, there had only been 14 counselors. They had to be members of the Sanhedrin, yes, but it went far beyond that. If anything were to have happened to the high priest of Israel to cause him to be incapacitated in any way whatsoever, it would have been one of those 14 counselors that took his place. That means that that night, as the old man was hustling across the streets of Old Jerusalem, the shadows lengthening around him, a bolt of cloth under his arm, his life in his hands, every Jewish person that recognized him bowed before him. This was the elite, the aristocracy of Israel, one of the 15 most important men in the entire nation, come to get the body of Jesus. With him was a man even older than he was. There's nobody in this room tonight who's given the slightest consideration to where you're going to be buried. I think you have to be a certain age before you worry about that foolishness. I couldn't care less. Joe had already had his grave dug. He was no kid. Nicodemus was probably older than he was. Wealthy, rabbi, Sanhedrin, teacher of Israel. That was no small title in the first century. And gutsy, 2 of the gutsiest men we've ever read about. One writer, Mark, said that they had to screw up their courage before they went to Pilate, the Roman governor of Israel, to ask for the body of Jesus. I've got money that says they did. Their knees must have been knocking together like tambourines when they walked into the praetorium, the governor's palace that night, because for practical purposes, they had committed suicide. Pilate turned out to have been something less than a human being. He was an animal, a beast. He's a man that did that to women and kids, loads of them. He made an unbelievable number of dead people. He was one of the very few Roman governors from anywhere that was ever recalled to Rome for excessive brutality. And that's not excessive brutality. That's only what you did to a non-Roman. The penalty for scourging a Roman citizen was execution. There was no law to protect the non-Roman. You could do anything you wanted to do to them. Pilate did that to babies. Ultimately, the Emperor Gaius ordered him home, found him guilty of excessive brutality, and suggested that it might be nice if he fell on his own sword and committed suicide. If he didn't do it, the legion could help him. Eusebius tells us how he did it. Eusebius tells us how he went about committing suicide. Philo wrote his book around the year 50 down in Alexandria, and he was no Christian. He described Pilate as a man of a stubborn, obnoxious, hateful, rebellious, spiteful disposition. He had nothing good to say about him. A man whose governorship was characterized by briberies, extortions, executions without trial beyond number. An absolutely lovable individual who wouldn't have thought twice about crucifying 2 old men on the next 2 crosses going up. Because that night, when they asked for the body of Jesus, in effect what they were actually saying was that they were either relatives or family, followers, disciples, believers, anything you want to call them, in a man that Pilate had just had put to death as an enemy of the state. By asking for his body, they were confessing that they too were enemies of the state and eligible for crucifixion. Of course their knees were knocking together. Whose wouldn't be? Fortunately for them, Pilate was more interested in the fact that Joe was trying to say Jesus was dead. He knew better. He knew that nobody died in 6 hours on any cross. It couldn't possibly have been over 8 or 9 hours Jesus had stood in front of him. He had condemned him to death. Allowing for the time that it takes to walk across Old Jerusalem, actually crucify a man, Jesus couldn't possibly have been hanging on the cross for much over the 6 hours that John records. And here's Joe trying to say he's dead? Pilate was never going to buy that one. I can't really say I blame him. The shortest recorded crucifixion that we could find took 36 hours, dying by inches. The longest recorded crucifixion we could find took 9 days. The vast majority of crosses, I think that includes his, were not raised above the ground. It was too much work. The victim would be crucified lying down, then the cross propped up. His feet would wind up no higher above the ground than the pews you're sitting in. Lions and hyenas were a real thing in first century Israel. The records indicate that many a man and woman hung there, watched the animal come, and then were eaten alive from their feet up while they hung there like a slab of beef, vultures sitting on their shoulders, pecking their eyes out while they lived. And no, I'm not trying to make anyone sick. I'm only glossing over it. This isn't the whole story. We've forgotten it. But this was life in the first century. Pilate saw it every day in the week. He was not about to believe that a man with a chest capacity like that one was going to die in 6 hours on any cross. That's why he sent for the officer that was in charge of the execution detail, a centurion, commander of 100 men. We'd call him a captain. It wasn't until that Roman officer could swear to his own commander, "Sure, he's dead. I put a spear in him myself just to make sure," or words to that effect, that Pilate would sign the chit that gave Joe permission to take the body off the cross. You can almost read the old man's sigh of relief. We're going to live a little longer. They took off running. In context, nothing else makes sense. They must have been putting one foot in front of the other one just as rapidly as they could do it. Because Luke uses a strange term in the Greek. It means there was the time of the lighting of candles. The stars were beginning to come out. It was the eve of the high holiday, the Passover, the high Sabbath, the second most important day in the Jewish year. And the Jewish day, of course, begins at sundown, not sunrise. Based on that term, time of the lighting of candles, those two old men had something less than an hour in which to live. See, the penalty was for working on any Sabbath, never mind the high Sabbath, was execution. Jews put you in a rock pile and threw rocks at you until someone broke your head. They called it stoning. Jewish method of doing it. This was the Roman method. Based on that term, they had less than an hour. They had to have been moving. All four riders, I'd say, you can imagine what their chances were of talking their way out of the rock pile if they got caught working on the high Sabbath. With Jesus' body, he was altogether too controversial then as well as today. Besides, there were already criminals under one law. Their own Sanhedrin had recently passed a law that said that anyone who admitted to being a follower or a disciple of the carpenter from Nazareth would be excommunicated. That gets very few people excited today. But in the first century in Israel, it was very different. Excommunication meant, of course, you lost most of your temple privileges. But it went far beyond that. No one could knowingly by law walk within 6 feet of you on the street. You were denied the use of the bath. You were denied the use of the razor. You could not be taught in the presence of anyone else. Your testimony was worthless in any court of law. You could not hire, nor could you be hired in Israel. You couldn't hold a job. And you could neither buy nor sell beyond the absolute necessities of life, which the law interpreted to be bread and water. This means that whatever those two old men had been an hour earlier, suddenly they had become awfully poor men. What good is your money, no matter how much you've got, if you can't purchase something with it? All they could buy was bread and water. Their property automatically reverted to the state. Their wives had no rights. They had sold it all down the tube to take a body off the cross. I don't know what they believed. They sure believed something. They disappear from history. There isn't even a believable legend about either one of them. There's a couple legends about Joe. But frankly, your imagination has to be better than mine to accept them. There doesn't seem to be anything on Nicodemus. It's almost as if they had been created to bury someone and then disappear. Like a few kings I read about. But that's getting philosophical. At that moment of time, they were sweating. All four writers, that makes it historical evidence, tell us something that gets extremely important, that the women watched everything that took place. One writer names 4 girls. Mary from the village of Magdala, Mary the Magdalene. The other Mary, probably the wife of Clopas, the mother of John Mark. Without question, this was Jesus' own aunt, his mother's older sister. It was common enough in the first century to give 2 girls in the same family the same name. Many instances of it in literature. Mary Beth, Mary Jane, something like that. A woman named Salome, and his mother was there. John says also the other women who came up with him out of Galilee. So we know historically that there were at least 3 or 4 women, probably more, that watched everything that took place. And that gets quite serious. I can't prove this, but I refuse to believe that those 4 girls sat on a rock and knitted while 2 old men worked their heads off, simply because I have yet to meet the 4 women that would do that. Besides, if they got caught there a moment after sundown, they too were Sabbath breakers, and the penalty was death. And they were about to get caught. No question, they were dead. You see, the high priest and the Pharisees were watching everything that was happening that night. If it wasn't true that either they or their subordinates were actually there, probably standing on top of the city wall looking down on them, how could they possibly have gone to Pilate the next morning, at least 12 hours in the future, and pointed out the exact tomb Jesus' body was in? How did they know where he'd been buried unless they'd been there that night watching? Is it too much to stretch your imaginations just a little bit and visualize that little burial party throwing one eye over their shoulder at the sun to see how much longer they've got left to live? The other eye at that group in the distance waiting for their bones? They were moving, and the women must have helped. There was altogether too much work to be done. A cross had to be lowered, the nails pulled out of his body. There are some 30-odd steps involved in burying a man under Jewish law, both then and today. It begins by very formally addressing him by his Hebrew name and that of his father. Yeshua ben David, Jesus the son of David, we ask your forgiveness for any indignity we may inflict upon your body in the process of preparing you for burial. It ends by kissing his lips with love. Somehow they get that out of Genesis 50. The work is usually done by women. In between, he's to be washed, shaven, his hair cut, his beard trimmed, his fingernails clipped and cleaned. You couldn't just wash him. You had to dig a pit and use a special washing board. You couldn't use cool water, let alone cold. It had to be warm, fragrant, aromatic, spiced. Ultimately, he would be anointed in fragrant spices and oils in liquid form, dressed and wrapped in a sheet. A tremendous amount of work. By now, considerably less than an hour in which to do it. The girls had to have helped. The cross was lowered, the nails pulled out of his body. They did at least as much as they had to do to preserve it. They wrapped him in a sheet. Using the Greek, Matthew and Luke both say that Jesus was folded into the cloth. This one was stretched out flat. He was laid on his back on half of it. The other half was brought over his head and draped over the front. If that's not folded, tell me what it is. Mark said he was wrapped. I don't see any conflict. John said he was bound. This one was tied around the ankles, again around the waist, with cords probably made of rushes. He wound up being wrapped, folded, and bound into the cloth, all at the same time. No conflict. They laid him in a particular tomb. Matthew said it was Joe's own tomb. As far as I'm concerned, it's immaterial. I think they might have used pilots if it was any closer and they thought they could have gotten away with it. They were sweating. Nicodemus's contribution, 100 pounds Roman weight, 70 pounds our weight, of myrrh and aloes. Why? It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. It's contradictory. The Jews have never mummified a body, ever. The Jews have never embalmed a body when they could possibly help it. The Jews have never used winding strips. In tradition, the Bible does not say that Jesus was wrapped up like a mummy. John was very emphatic. Jesus was buried according to the manner and the custom of the Jews. And all the Jews have ever done, then or today, when the law permitted it, was to put a man in a sheet and bury him before sundown the same day. There was an Orthodox rabbi in New England that told me they'd be doing it there if the law permitted it. They want the body to go back to dust as rapidly as possible. So why myrrh and aloes? That's why we had to read the Talmud. As I said before, truth is the name of the game. It was about 2/3 of the way through that collection of holy law that we came across a rather obscure little tractate, the Yebel Rabbathi, Jewish burial customs. This is almost verbatim. In ancient times, it was the custom to bury someone who had died of bowel trouble with spices and ointments placed next to the body. But because this was an embarrassment to the living, who were suffering from the same disease even while they lived, it became the custom, and afterwards it was enacted, it became law, to put spices and ointments next to the body of every dead person, so that there would never be any embarrassment to the living. All Nicodemus was doing was obeying his own law that called for spices and ointments to kill the smell of a decaying body. Several other references in the Talmud to the spices being used as a deodorant. If you wish to argue, think back to the story of Lazarus. He was a wealthy Jew. When he died, society people from Jerusalem came down to Bethany to help his sisters Mary and Martha mourn. Both accounts of the story clearly reveal that they loved their brother with a passion, and that they also had the money and the desire to give their brother the best funeral that first-century Israel could afford to give to anybody. If it really had been the custom to bury a man like a mummy with 100 pounds of concrete or something mixed in the folds for whatever reason, they'd have done it. But if they had, when Jesus stood outside that that tomb and yelled, "Hey, Laz, come on out." Look it up. Nobody went in and got him. Nobody carried him out. It says that although he was bound hand and foot, he sat up, stood up, and he walked out. And there's only one person in this room tonight young enough to believe that a mummy could walk. You either have to be a little kid or a horror story freak to buy that one. But I tried it. Try getting out of bed tonight with your knees held together. You're going to find out it doesn't work. A mummy can neither sit up, stand up, nor walk. But Lazarus did all those things. The only thing that makes any sense is he must have been able to shuffle one foot in front of the other. He could only have been buried according to the manner and the custom of the Jews, in a sheet. We just never looked it up before. And when you get down to the bottom line, what difference does it make? Unless, of course, you happen to be trying to witness to a Jew in Jerusalem, and you tell them that Jesus was Jewish, and they buried him like an Egyptian. You know what happens? You get laughed at. I wonder how many Jews we've turned off over the last 2,000 years because we're too lazy to do our homework. We might have to answer for that someday. I don't like it even a little. The two old men rolled a stone across the face of the tomb. The Greek term is a sportomegapetra. Literally translated, a very, 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 very great stone. The Greek indicates something that weighed in excess of 3,000 pounds. It would be perfectly easy for two old men to do it, because Jewish burial tombs are nothing but caves, or holes dug into the side of a hill. A large stone will be placed above the entrance. After the body has been interred, the men in the burial party put their back against it and start it rolling. Gravity drops it into place. But to open it would mean that you would have to roll at least 1.5 tons uphill with no power equipment. Those girls had an awfully good question on Sunday morning. They meant it. There was absolutely nothing rhetorical about it. Who's going to roll that stone away? It would have taken every man they knew in Jerusalem pushing together to do it. The Codex Bezae may be the oldest piece of manuscript still in existence. It's in the Cambridge Library in England. It goes back to the first half of the 2nd century. The copier is obviously copying from a 1st century manuscript. In a gloss, that's a note in the margin that you can never copy off into the text. He says that the stone was of a size that 20 men pushing together could not have moved. It was no pebble. The girls had a good question. But a better question might have been, what were they doing there? If those good Jewish girls had actually been there on Friday night, and they watched Jesus being buried, why did they go home? I think they helped. Why did they go home? Waste their high holiday, their time, their money, purchasing more spices and ointments, preparing them, and now they're coming back to bury Jesus all over again. You know, the world's got some good questions. If that isn't a contradiction, tell me what is. Burying a man twice in 3 days. Kind of ridiculous. Unless possibly on Friday night they did what I've done, so have you. At least once. That there's no way we can finish this work tonight. Let's do what we can tonight and finish it in the morning. Or in this case, we do what we have to do to preserve his body. And let's get out of here while our heads are still on our shoulders. If we're still alive, we'll be back on Sunday and finish. The Encyclopedia Judaica, a good encyclopedia printed in Jerusalem, the same thing as the Britannica or the Americana, under the heading of Burial, 1972 edition, says that it's obvious, only to the Jews. It's obvious from the account of the burial of Jesus of Nazareth that there was no time on Friday night in which to bury him according to the requirements of the law. The burial party apparently did only what they had to do to preserve the body. They intended to give him a legal burial on Sunday. The Jews saw it. Very few, if any, Christians ever looked for it before. That too says something. At this point, there's a gap in the historical record of the crucifixion. I never saw it before. I've never heard it preached. 3 out of 4 writers don't tell us what happened for the next 3 days. They end the story on Friday night with 2 old men rolling a big boulder. They drop the story. They don't pick it up again until Sunday, when the women are wondering how they're going to get past it. In between, there's nothing. Probably they didn't know. The only one that gives us any indication at all of what could have happened is Matthew. And nobody in the world but Matt could have written the 28th chapter of his book, because he turned out to have been a thief. He was a traitor. He was a man that loved money more than he loved anything else in the world, including his own life. He'd been a tax collector. Over the years, I may have called tax collectors worse names than that, and I meant them. But this one earned it. Israel then, and it usually was, a conquered nation. This time it was Rome that was grinding them under its heel. And Caesar was demanding his taxes. His method of collecting? Supreme simplicity. He put the job out for bid. Matthew was a Jew who had bid for the privilege of collecting the enemy's taxes from his own people. It'd be like you bidding for the privilege of collecting Russia's taxes in this town. You know how you'd be loved? When he walked down the street, every Jew deliberately turned their back on him. not permitting him to see their face. If they were forced to look at him, they spit in his face. That, too, was the custom. He had absolutely no friends except the other tax collectors and the Parsees, until one day a carpenter walked by. Said, "Hey, Matt, how would you like to follow me?" He got up from his table, walked away, never went back, and if we can believe tradition, it's only tradition, we can't prove it, he died an awfully horrible death in a place that we call Iran. But at that moment of time, of all those Jewish men walking with Jesus, not one of them but Matthew would have talked to a dog or a pig, what they call the Roman legionnaires. Matthew dealt with Romans. Matthew knew Romans by their first names. They'd been keeping him alive for we don't know how long. Every man in this room knows that a traitor is number one on any patriot's hit list in any conquered nation, and Matthew was a traitor. He never went anywhere without a Roman legionnaire in back of him with a sharp spear to keep him alive, as well as to assist in collecting his taxes. And that gets awfully serious when you realize that the 28th chapter of the book of Matthew is the only one in the entire Bible that could have been dictated by a Roman legionnaire. Sure, Matthew wrote it, but the information in that chapter could never have been given to him by anyone except a Roman soldier, because there was a Roman guard in the tomb of Jesus. For this, I wound up in the Library of Congress. I discovered that the book we needed was awfully difficult to get in this country. It's practically classified. The Military Institutions of the Roman Legion, written in the year 390 by Flavius Virginius Renatus. Somebody must have hated that kid before he was born. Imagine doing that to a poor innocent baby. Flavius Virginius. By the year 390, the Legion had begun to fall apart. Caesar wanted to restore it to its first century powers. Flavius was telling him how. He described the Roman Guard at the time of Christ. It turned out not to be two or three sleepy-eyed characters, the way the painters like to show it, leaning on sticks. It was a fixed fighting unit, very similar to today's Green Beret and Navy SEALs. That's why the book is so hard to get in this country. Our own military would just as soon you didn't read it. We discovered that our own Green Berets being trained by the principals in that book. That's how rough they were. Napoleon said he never went anywhere without a copy of it in his pocket. Apparently, the only person who should have read it and didn't was Caesar. And of course, the Legion was destroyed. But a Roman Guard consisted of anywhere from 4 to 20 men, usually 16, superbly trained with a spear, a short sword, a dagger. Each man carried 5 javelins in the curve of his shield. Each man carried a sling, his primary weapon, with which he was trained to make one swing around his head and heave a 1-pound rock 70 feet and get a 12 to 14-inch post every single time at 70 feet. These jokers were lethal. If you can believe Flavius, they could pick off the head, stomach, or feet at will at 70 feet. They fought back-to-back in a geometrical pattern, each man responsible for only 6 square feet of space and his buddy's back. When one man moved, they all moved. A living fighting tank. As far as I could find out, they never lost a fight. They were considered invincible in the first century. This is what was guarding the tomb of Jesus. To make it better, Polybius described them about 2 centuries before Christ. He says that if the guard was assigned to sentry duty and one man out of 16 fell asleep, all 16 would be executed on the spot by being beaten to death with clubs and stones. Your best friend had to take a swing at you. Tremendous. But a few years ago, there was something called the Passover plot, which it was said that 16 of these characters fell asleep. They snored mightily, in unison, maybe in harmony, while a collection of itinerant fishermen, an ex-crooked tax collector, a 14-year-old boy, and maybe a few women, sneaked in by night, quietly. They rode at least 3,000 pounds uphill, quietly. They stole the body of Jesus, quietly, and they got away with it. Well, anything is possible, but that's awfully high on my list of improbabilities. To make it better, the stone was sealed with Pilate's seal. That one was easy. A gob of wax or clay on each side of the stone. 2 more vertically. 2 leather thongs. A gob of wax with a cross, Pilate's ring, applied in the presence of the Legion. The penalty for breaking the seal of Rome without authorization? Crucifixion, upside down. If they couldn't find you, they'd round up every man, woman, and child in a given village or town and crucify the whole place. That's where Hitler learned it. You just did not break the seal of Rome without authorization. We did not intend to do all this, but I think we have shown rather conclusively that never in the history of mankind has the body of a condemned criminal been as securely guarded as was Jesus of Nazareth. All Rome was going to make sure that he did not come out of that hole. That's why no one but one of them, the pick of the Roman Legion, could possibly have told Matthew what he wrote. Nobody but Matt would have talked to a Roman to find out what he had to say, like a drumhead. They were there to guard a seal. If that seal got broken, 16 Romans died. They'd have killed anyone who came within 70 feet of it. That's what they were there for. Nobody in their right mind would go near that garden. Of course, the women came back in innocence on Sunday. They didn't know the soldiers were there. While they were home obeying their holiday laws, their own high priest was breaking them by going to Pilate on the Sabbath and arranging for the guard. The women didn't know the army was there. In context, the only thing that makes sense is the Romans must have gone over the hill before the women showed up. Because if it was a question of 3 or 4 women or 16 Romans, you decide who just lost that fight. So nobody in the world except a Roman soldier could possibly have told Matthew that at some time between sundown on Saturday night and sunrise of the day that we call the first Easter, an angel descended. The appearance of the angel was like lightning. The god became like dead men. There was a severe earthquake. The stone was rolled away, and Jesus came out. Now that's first century language. There's no theologian of any denomination who's going to try to tell you the Holy Spirit gave the writers of the Bible a supernatural language in which to write, a language that every generation would understand. That is not true. Each man wrote in the language he himself spoke, with a vocabulary at his own command. And that's one of the reasons we have so many different translations of the Bible. The meanings of words change from one generation to another. The Bible has to be retranslated every generation, so each one of us has it in the language we speak. I do not speak the same English my father did. My 23-year-old son, I guarantee you, does not speak the same English I do. And I don't think we even communicate. We think alike, but communication, no way. The simplest word that everybody here understands is the word gay. I grew up understanding that to mean happy, joyful, merry, having a good time. Somebody told me it means that today. In less than one generation, the meaning of that word has completely changed. If that was in the Bible more than the one time it does appear in the KJV, something about gay clothing in James, we'd have to retranslate every copy that there was to make it mean what the Greek meant. What I'm saying is that if you think about it, you know doggone well that the meanings of words change. Matthew was a first-century Greek, a Jew, writing in first-century Greek. Was he saying something that the people of his generation understood perfectly and we don't? Was he using words? I've made my point. The Greek is famous for it. That have more than one meaning? We had to find out. We took that story apart almost a syllable at a time in the Greek, only looking for answers to our own questions. We found our key in the word earthquake, seismos, seismic, seismology, seismograph, earthquake. But the literal translation of that word then and today is a severe commotion. The only important thing being, where is the commotion happening? If it's in the ground, a seismos is an earthquake. If it's in the air, you translate it wind, gale, tempest. We use the word in the 8th chapter to describe the storm in the Sea of Galilee, when Jesus rebuked the seismos and the waves were still. He rebuked the wind. Aristotle taught that earthquakes were nothing but severe gales blowing through underground caves, making the ground rumble, rattle, and roll. To the first century Greek, just a question of where's the big wind blowing. The appearance of the angel, not his features, his idea, his aspect, he looked like, he appeared to be. A brilliant white light, a flash, a glare, a burst of white light, something that's going to light up the entire sky. Lightning. At which point the scream was, "Hallelujah, we got it." If you haven't noticed, I haven't told you what produced these images in back of me, and I can't. Up until October of 81, I'd have said we know. But until 120 of the best names in the world, and I'm not one of them, can sign the paper and give it to the world for free, we're not talking about it. We did everything imaginable to avoid sensationalism, to keep anyone from making a buck out of it. It didn't work, but we tried. Today, I've got to say that after 7 years plus of the most intensive research that science is capable of bringing to bear on anything, we do not know what produced the image in the Shroud of Turin. When we had the symposium at Connecticut College in New London, UConn at Avery Point, in October of 81, they came from all over the world. 2 teams from Australia, Nippon Television, all over Europe and this country. All but 1 team packed up and went back home when they found out that there were not going to be any sensational announcements. This is or is not Jesus. He was or was not resurrected. They demanded sensationalism. I always thought that what they got was enough. I couldn't believe it the first time I heard it. They were told, and they did very little with it, that the image on the Shroud of Turin is not a forgery. It was not made by human hands. How's that for a statement by modern science? It was not made by human hands. It is not possible for modern science to duplicate it. We know how to put a team on the moon. We can do it again. We do not know how to reproduce this image. It appears to have been produced by something that resulted in the oxidation, dehydration, and the conjugation. He's having too much fun with this one. That's nothing but scientist devil talk, unless you happen to be a chemist, for the fact that the image is a scorch. It's burned onto the topmost fibers of the cloth. But what produced that burn is beyond the capability of modern science to duplicate in the lab. And one of the unbreakable laws of science is that no matter what you think you have in your hand, no matter what it appears to be, unless you can duplicate it, you're forced to say you don't really understand it. You don't understand something unless you can duplicate it. How do you duplicate a one-shot? Something which doesn't seem to have ever happened before, it certainly hasn't happened since. This is extremely crude, but if you can imagine pulling one hair out of your head, scorching one face of that hair, not get the sides, definitely not the bottom, scorch one face of one hair, you might be able to duplicate one aspect of the problem. But that can't be done. Again, this is crude. If you can imagine an infinite number of laser beams, this is not laser, but it is non-isotropic. There's no diffusion. One for every single pore in the body, coming out in a straight line, scorching an uncountable number of tiny dots, almost like a newspaper picture under magnification, but only on the topmost fibers of the cloth. You could duplicate another aspect of the problem. But of course, that type of energy doesn't exist on Earth. There's only some indication of it on a 14-foot-long cloth. So what happens? Back to Italy. God willing, John Paul cooperating, we'll be back there next year. We just asked the church to let us have the cloth, 3 weeks, 24-hour days. Every question we answered in 78 has raised 10 new ones that no one could have possibly conceived of. Chemistry's 100% done. It completely refutes physics. How do you tell somebody in school that the laws of physics aren't worth much anymore? We have something that says they're wrong, yet they're right. Chemistry, X-ray fluorescence, ultraviolet, infrared, totally preclude the possibility of this being a painting. Despite what you might have read in the press, there is absolutely nothing on this cloth that could have been used to produce pigment in any form whatsoever. It is not a painting. Every theory that anyone has ever come up with, including the Rolling Stones, they had one, they published it, it was tried. It didn't work any more than the others did. Nothing worked. Up until October, I can go on and on and on with it. But up until October of 78, there was only, October of 81, there was only one theory that just about everybody could buy. A statement made in one of the world's biggest laboratories. The image on the Shroud of Turin could only have been produced by what may ultimately turn out to have been the greatest burst of radiant energy ever known to man, possibly even exceeding that of a nuclear bomb, emanating uniformly from every pore of the man's body, from the inside out, in a millisecond of time. I once timed a strobe light at an airport at 9 times a second. This would have been 1,000. In a thousandth of a second or less, producing a temperature that one man estimated had to have been in excess of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Enough in a millisecond to scorch the cloth, but not destroy it. Undoubtedly, this would be the experience the Christians normally call the resurrection. Bong. Except I've got to say, how do you duplicate a resurrection in the laboratory? That's our problem. I've had to look at every theory that anyone has ever come up with for the image-producing mechanism on the shroud with the eyes of a fundamentalist. Now, don't ask me what kind of a fundamentalist I am, because I don't know. I've met too many different kinds, in this state included. There's one group that says the King James Bible was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us. I don't want to be that kind of a fundamentalist. What I mean is that up until I left home, only God knows when, science has yet to disprove the first story in the Bible. That's about as far as I can go tonight. Maybe afterwards, questions and answers, I could go further with it. But I believe the Bible is to be truth. And I had to look at the theory for the image-producing mechanism on the shroud with those eyes. Because if anything contradicts that story I've told you tonight, this isn't Jesus. I got my biblio with me. About every fourth word is nailed down tight. It's withstood a great deal of scrutiny already. It's historical fact. But nothing has contradicted it. And it's too late now for it to happen. But only one theory fits in. And no, we can't prove it. We may never prove it. My own theology doesn't permit us to prove it. I don't think we'll ever be able to for several reasons. But suppose someday, as happened before, every telephone in the United States and England goes off at the same time. Some lab is screaming, you won't believe what we just found. No, you never do. Just try it. Suppose this time we've got the frequency. Now we can talk about it. Radiant energy. No, it does not have to be thermonuclear. That light's radiant energy. So is X-ray. But virtually every time it occurs in a burst, it's accompanied by a brilliant white light. a flash, a glare, a burst of white light, something that's going to light up the entire sky. With or without a mushroom cloud, with or without sound, that white light is there just about every time. And yes, I do believe in angels. I know altogether too many people who have seen them and talked to them. I've been present when they were. I can tell angel stories until tomorrow morning. I believe in them, but I don't believe at that hour before dawn, before the Jewish women showed up, that the Roman legion saw an angel. I think that what they saw was the mechanics, the cause and effect of the resurrection. Father went about raising his son, and they did not have the vocabulary with which to describe it. The term radiant energy did not exist in the first century. We might know too much about it, but Matthew never heard it. Is it possible that the women told him they had seen angels? Is it possible that the Roman legion told him that there was a tremendous burst of white light? The stone went hurtling over their head, and because the women had seen angels, all four writers say so, and he believed the women, that he thought possibly the Romans did too? I don't know. But try this on for size. A Middle Eastern night. No pollution in southern Israel even today. There are nights when the stars are bigger than saucers. No rain at that time of year. Dead silence. Nobody in their right mind, as I said, would go near the garden. The Roman legion was not asleep. Polybius, and again he was no Christian, said that they would be checked every hour and a half maximum by a centurion to make sure that they were awake and on duty. Their lives depended on staying awake. They'd have been bored to tears, but they'd been there leaning on their spears looking for trouble. Suddenly something, and science has no hope of ever proving what it was, something within the body of that man, very thoroughly dead, wrapped in a sheet, lying on some kind of a slab, triggers the most unbelievable burst of radiant energy ever known. Instantaneously heated to something over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, any nuke is going to tell you that the air in that tomb, which should have been cold and stale and dead and damp, after 3 days of being closed up, high, that fast, would have to expand a minimum of 3 to 5 psi, pounds per square inch. He'll also tell you that that's the principle of a nuclear bomb, that mountain would dissolve and take most or all of Jerusalem along with it, if the tomb were tightly corked. But it wasn't. That 3,000-pound boulder at the mouth of that tomb would have been like a paper cap on the end of a glass milk bottle. That's seismus, and this is a legitimate translation that no one could possibly have made before 1979. That shock wave, or maybe that thermal wind, would have hit that rock and lifted it right over the head of the Roman god. Of course they went catatonic. They froze. They became like dead men. So would every man in this room when something like that happened. Then when he came walking out of the tomb, apparently they became non-catatonic. They began to put one foot in front of the other one just as rapidly as they could do it. They checked out of that piece of real estate. And it's interesting that the pride of the Roman legion did not report to their own centurion in Antonia. They checked in with a Jewish high priest. Well, someone said 2 good reasons. Number 1, who wants to be converted to instantaneous dog food? Number 2, when something like that happens, you find the nearest priest, regardless of what his denomination is. You've got problems. Over the centuries, theologians have often said that the gospel writer John had a lousy Greek vocabulary. Picked the wrong word to describe the movement of the stone. No one has ever known what to do with the word airu. Until today, no translator ever considered the legitimate translation wind. There simply was no wind big enough to move a rock that size. Everyone here knows there is such a wind. You can't ignore it anymore. John never used anything comparable to roll. The word airu means picked up, lifted, moved, physically carried, or sailed away. Today it looks as if John's vocabulary wasn't that bad, because wherever that stone came down, it sure as heck was not next to the entrance of the tomb. Suppose there was light. Fit into the Bible. You check me out. You're the theologian in this place. I'm going to use nothing but Bible. Straight. Jesus was in the beginning before time began. He always was. He's immortal. He and the Father are of the same essence. That word means identical. You cannot think of any way that Father and Son were different. God is light. You know what that's saying, and no one's ever taught on it? If Jesus was in the beginning with the Father, and they're identical, and the Father was light, so was Jesus. At some point in history, or before history, he must have been light. Is it at all conceivable that his physical body, and our bodies are energy, shifted forms of energy and became pure energy? Maybe a blue-white light passed through the cloth, scorching an image on it, triggering the chain reaction that we call the resurrection, heating the air, expanding it, blowing the stone away, dissipating the heat, providing an exit for himself? I don't know. But boy, is it suspicious. Could that be what the Jewish people call the Shekinah glory? That tremendous burst of white light that historically appeared in the Temple of the Jews several times in recorded history, so brilliant that every Jewish person had to throw themselves on the ground and cover their head with their hands? The actual visible presence of the living God? Could that possibly be what scorched this image in back of me? I don't know. I'm working on it. You can touch it, but try to lock your fingers into it. And that simply means what we've got here is not Mickey Mouse. Because Christianity rises and falls on the resurrection of Jesus. If Jesus was resurrected, he was God. If he wasn't resurrected, Christianity is the biggest farce, the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on mankind. And there's nothing in between. No one's ever accused me of being tactful. It's too late to worry now. It's absolutely stupid to call him a good man. He did not give us that prerogative. It's God or garbage. I've known that for more years than anybody in this room has been, well, maybe a couple of you, I can't say it about, has been alive. But I never thought I would ever live to see the day that I could point at something and say, hey, kids, historically, archaeologically, scientifically confirmed data, which seems to be saying a first-century Jew was resurrected. What you going to do with that one? It tosses it right down to a one-on-one. Or as one of the men on the team, and you can read his name in every encyclopedia in the world, said, Paul, all of our lives, we used to worship a God called science. We believed only what we could see and what we could touch, nothing more. All of a sudden now, it's our God, science, that's saying that Jesus is Lord. Now, what in heck are you going to do with that? It isn't that we want to believe, but either we have to accept the fact that it's not us, it's our equipment that's saying it, or we have to scrap the most sophisticated equipment the world has. And if that's true, it doesn't mean a blessed thing what my wife believes. It's what am I going to do with it? Well, he did. I prayed with him. Prayed with a lot of other people, too. Some of us think that the whole thing was tied together by a cute little redhead somewhere in the state of Vermont. I never heard her name or remember what town. I was doing questions and answers. She came up and said, Paul, doesn't it say somewhere in the Bible that before Jesus can return, the gospel has to be translated into every language that there is? Sure. Isn't this translating it into the language of science? Thanks to you, that kid was smarter than all the rest of us put together. Thanks to a 2,000-year-old rag that none of us wanted, today we have the gospel in the international language of science, chemistry, physics, numbers, the language that every scientist speaks. And that is the Shroud of Turin. Thanks a lot.